Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohammad Bahri. First of all, thank you for inviting me into this prestigious symposium, which called the third Borobudur International Symposium 2021 in Magelang, Indonesia. Today, we're going to talk about the understanding the public responses on vaccine passport as immigration policy using the big data analysis. So this is a little bit information about me. My name is Muhammad Thoriq Bahri. I born on Surakarta, Indonesia at October 8, 1991. Now my occupation is as an immigration analyst at the Directorate General of Immigration at the Ministry of Law and Human Rights Republic of Indonesia. So this is my table of contents, which you can see here. So first, we're going to start with the introductions. What is the vaccine passport and why it's important? And the second one is the data and analysis, because we're going to use the big data to identify the public responses on this vaccine passport policy. And the third one, we're going to emphasize and to elaborate more about the result of the data analysis to understand the interaction pattern and sentiment. And the fourth part will be the discussions, which is the one important points of this research to understand the issues behind the responses of the public on the vaccine passport policy. And the last one is conclusions, which is we can wrap up from the another points for the further research. So the first chapter will be introductions. The vaccine passport, a brand old idea. It's very interesting. Why I call it old idea? So for first of all, the vaccine passport can be explained as the official documentations that proves if someone has tested negative for specific illness or has been protected against them as the mandatory documents for the cross-border activities. So why the vaccine passport is very important in against the pandemic nowadays, because the current situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, as recorded in 25 of October 2021, more than 250 million cases were recorded. And many of the countries worldwide is trying to limit the international travel to reduce the impact of the pandemic. It's affected the gross national product from the tourism sector by 49.1% globally only in 2021. Of course, it cannot be continue. I mean, like the impact will be bigger and higher. So to enabling the international travel with the safest way is important to cure the global GDP. Why it's not a new idea actually? So we can see here, I show you a little bit brief. So the medical certificate actually is one form of the vaccine passport, which already implemented in 1918. But actually is create a vaccine ban movement in some European countries, because most of the people are not going to be vaccinated because they heard a lot of the bad news about the vaccinations. And then the second one, in 2005, the WHO is implemented the yellow card as immigration documents against the yellow fever during that time. But what happened? Because 2005 is not that far away ago, we can see here the impact is the anti-vaxxer movement happening in social media. And it's reducing the vaccination rates against the yellow fever to decrease rapidly in some of Americans and some of the African countries. And then, how about the public responses on the vaccine passport as immigration policy? We have to understand this in order to minimize the impact of the inefficiency of the vaccine passport in the future. So the second part will be the data and analysis. I will use the big data to identify the interaction pattern, which I will tell you after this. So the big data sources is taken from the Twitter database, which contains more than 18,000 tweets worldwide, which talking about the vaccine passport policy. And this data is obtained from March to October 2021. So it's relatively new data actually. And why I use Twitter? Because Twitter is one of the big data producing platform which updated in a real time. So we can understand the current situations only by understand what happened in Twitter right now. And then the second question is why March to October 2021? Because as we know, the first vaccine passport was implemented in China at the 10th of March to 2021. So after China implemented their vaccine passport at the time, more countries following China to implement the vaccine passport as their immigration policy. So we're going to analyze the relationship or the connections that are specified between the social big data actually. So the SNA analysis is kind of like the social network analysis or the analytical method, which uh, getting popular after the Arab Spring in 2011. As we know, the Arab Spring movement is started in Twitter and is successfully make a revolution in five Middle East countries. So the SNL analysis is very important to be used to understand what the issues and who is the actor behind a public opinion against issues actually. So the third step, we have to understand the result of the analysis, of course. So actually, the most active users, as we can see here, most of them are came from the ordinary person. The people who tweets more than 3 times in these issues, the vaccine passport issues is dominated by the ordinary person. The second one, the top tweeters, which is the user who have the big role in build a public opinion about the vaccine passport, is also dominated by the ordinary person, company, and news agency. The top mentioned users, which is the user which mentioned by those ordinary people to make kind of like to spread their information, to clarify some information, is dominated by news agency, politician, and activists. However, actually, more than 10,000 users in Twitter said or have a negative sentiment on the implementation of the vaccine passport worldwide. Only 4,000 of them are have the positive sentiment. And actually, the research is getting more interesting because we're going to answer why. Why the vaccine passport policy to enabling the international travel is make the people think negatively on that kind of uh, policy. So I will tell you why in the discussion of this research. Why? Why people are against the vaccine passport? I will use the policy and legal analysis to answer this question. The first one, actually, the vaccine passport can be categorized as the policies without public, which is the vaccine passport policy is implemented without involving the public because the pandemic is getting worse and the government must be action as soon as possible. So in the legal basis analysis, there is a law 1991 Personal Responsibility Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act said if the authorized migrants cannot access the medical aids during their first 5 year stay in the United States, which means in the 5 years after you arrive in that country, you cannot go to the doctor freely. You have to pay by your own. First. And the second one, you cannot access to the national healthcare system, which means you cannot have the proper access to the vaccination program policy by the local government. Also, in the Europe, based on the Central European Asylum System or CIAS, which regulated the status of the asylum seeker and refugees, based on the research which conducted in the 20 migrant group randomly, only 6% of them are vaccinated. 6% in Europe. Only 6% of the migrant workers and people who are in Europe as the refugees is vaccinated. This condition is getting worse for the illegal and undocumented migrants, which means they cannot be vaccinated. And then actually, this is a fact which I took from the WHO report. Globally, only 5% of the international migrants who live outside their country or outside their origin country is vaccinated. That's why, this is the conclusion, that's why most of them are creating this kind of movement. So in the conclusion, I will wrap the information a little bit up. So actually, what happened is, one is information bias. No government related account which clarify and give any information about the vaccination passport in the social media. The second one, because of there is no right informations and clarification, is creating the rejection between the people. So most of people are not agree to the vaccine passport policy because most of them are heard the bad news about the vaccination. The third one, the policy is implemented without involving public. Of course, it will create a rejection from the public. And the fourth one, their immigration status is creating a big burden for the migrants to access the vaccination program. And because of this, many of them are tweets their opinions in the Twitter platform to build a public opinion about the vaccination passport. And the last one, the migrants' opinion is forming the global opinions in the Twitter platform about the vaccine passport policy. That's why we have to open up and make the vaccine is more available and more accessible regarding to their immigration status. Okay, thank you for your attention, everyone. For the any inquiries or any question, you can contact me via my email or Facebook or even my Instagram. Thank you for your attention and thank you for inviting me in this prestigious event.